The body of 34-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson, ex-wife of O.J. Simpson, was found after midnight on the sidewalk outside her West Los Angeles home. Next to it, the body of an unidentified 26-year-old man. Both had apparently been stabbed.
Often referred to as the trial of the century, the O.J. Simpson case was one of a kind. World-renowned NFL football player, actor, and later NBC sports announcer, Orenthal James Simpson was viewed as a successful role model for the American people. He had a strong image in the media and was cheered on by many. So, on June 17, 1994, when he was taken into custody for the first-degree murder of his ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and her friend Ron Goldman at the Bundy condominium, Los Angeles, the entire population of the United States was taken aback in shock of this accusation. 95 million people watched on TV as O.J. Simpson was taken by police after a 90-minute chase in his famous white Bronco through downtown L.A. For almost the entirety of the chase, O.J. was on the phone with a police officer, threatening suicide because he said he deserved to be with Nicole. By the end, though, the police officer convinced O.J. otherwise and the car pulled over. Strangely enough, although he was being chased by police cars, thousands of fans stood on the side of the highway, cheering O.J. on as if this was one of his football games.
Many people are out here, either on the freeway or on the bridges, on the overpasses, just to catch a glimpse of this situation as it goes by.
This began one of the most televised and controversial trials in history that lasted over 8 months, and of that time, that 133 days of the trial were publicly released on TV. The night of the murder, the neighborhood was described by many as quiet and still. What they didn't know was that just around the corner, 2 innocent victims were slaughtered and mangled in a fight for their lives. It wasn't until someone heard the continuous barking of Nicole's dog that the scene was discovered and the police were called. Immediately when they arrived, the LAPD began collecting evidence. Walking into the crime scene was like walking into a movie. Blood was everywhere, with red footprints trailing down the hallway. The bodies lay in puddles and the wounds inflicted were unreal. Knife stabs covered the bodies of Nicole and Ron. Their necks were slit almost to the point of decapitation. There were a few pieces of evidence laying around, but no weapon to be found. As police began to process all that was around them, they started to think of suspects who could be linked to the homicide. Their first clue was Nicole's ex-husband, O.J. Simpson. What exactly happened on the night of June 12, 1994 is still disputed, but is described by Doug Linder, a researcher of this famous case, through what he suspected were the sequence of events. Most likely, a single male came through the back entrance of Nicole Brown Simpson's condominium on Bundy Drive in the prestigious Brentwood area of Los Angeles. In a small, nearly enclosed area near the front gate, the man brutally slashed Nicole, almost severing her neck from her body. Then he struggled with, and repeatedly, about 30 times, stabbed Ronald Goldman. Ron Goldman was a 25-year-old acquaintance of Nicole's, who had come to her condominium to return a pair of sunglasses that her mother had left earlier that evening at the Mezzaluna restaurant. A person would later post a sign outside the Mezzaluna reading, "Don't forget your sunglasses." The entire case lasted longer than anyone could have imagined. Long days and nights trailed behind the jurors and people involved, as the case only got deeper and deeper. Viewers sat at home as they listened to the defense and prosecution argue back and forth, rebutting each other's statements with each new claim. The prosecution relied on physical evidence found at the scenes and in O.J.'s car, along with the statements of witnesses for their case. The defense, or the Dream Team, came up with as many arguments against what the prosecution said as they could in order to place reasonable doubt in the courtroom that O.J. was guilty. The strong defense group consisted of attorneys Robert Kardashian, Johnny Cochran, and Robert Shapiro. These men held their ground throughout the trial as they fought long and hard for the defendant's innocence. At the end of one of the most draining but also climactic trials in the country, for the American people watching as well as those involved, the jury was finally put in the position to make their decision. After only 4 hours and 8 months of a trial, the jury's vote was almost unanimous. Everyone in the United States stood in silence as they awaited the verdict.
Mrs. Robertson.
Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles.
in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Nicole Brown Simpson, a human being, as charged in count 1 of the information. Superior Court of the State of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the State of California versus Orenthal James Simpson. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 187A, a felony upon Ronald Lyle Goldman, a human being, as charged in count 2 of the information. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, further find a special circumstance that the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, has in this case been convicted of at least one crime of murder of the first degree and one or more crimes of murder of the first or second degree to be not true.
Throughout the trial, there were many holes in both the evidence at the scene of the crime as well as the alibis of O.J. Simpson that had the potential to help the prosecution's case. One of the heavy arguments of the prosecution was that there was a time gap where O.J. had no alibi right around the period that the murder took place. O.J. first tried to argue that he was on his way to Chicago on June 12th, making it impossible for him to have committed the crime. While this was accurate, he did not leave his house with the limo driver, Alan Park, until after the incident occurred. There was a period as Alan waited in O.J.'s driveway to take him to the airport where no one knew where O.J. was. This, as the prosecutors stated, left ample time for O.J. to run to the nearby Bundy condo and come back before anyone would find him. Along with the lack of an alibi, there was an abundance of physical evidence that connected O.J. to the scene as well. Blood droplets were found in his car, in his living room, and on the driveway to his mansion that matched his and the samples found around Nicole's body. This was a huge discovery on the part of the prosecution. They also found gloves, which were the same gloves that O.J. received as a gift years before, size extra large, at the crime scene covered in blood. The defense argued that the gloves, because they did not fit, were not O.J.'s and that it could not be held against him as substantial evidence.
If it doesn't fit, you must acquit.
This was disputed in the court because of the fact that the gloves could have shrunk because of all that they'd been through while the evidence was being processed. Another piece of evidence that connected O.J. to the murder were the bloody shoe prints found on the floor that were identified as Bruno Magli, size 12. Simpson denied ever owning a pair of those shoes, but was later caught in his lie when there was a picture found of him wearing the exact type of shoe described. The defense did its best and eventually succeeded in finding the issues with the pieces of evidence that were put on the table against O.J. Their main argument was against the blood found in and around O.J.'s mansion and car that matched his. During the investigation, the chain of custody that was supposed to be kept documented throughout the handling of evidence was broken, and a small sample from a vial of O.J.'s blood that was taken during the initial investigation was lost. This missing blood brought up a question of whether or not some of the blood evidence around O.J.'s house or the Bundy complex could have been planted by police.
The zeitgeist during the time of the O.J. Simpson trial was essentially that of a celebrity-obsessed society. O.J. Simpson was a well-known figure during the late 20th century. He was in commercials for Hertz, starred in movies, and played on various sports teams and networks. Almost every person with a television or radio had heard his name before. The startling news of his trial bewildered all those that had admired him. They could not comprehend how someone they had so highly thought of could do something like this. The O.J. Simpson trial was full of controversy and highlighted the differing views of Americans. The United States was split between those who supported O.J., his fans and other black rights advocates, and people who believed O.J. was the culprit. Many people in the minority and black communities sided with O.J. because they believed he was being targeted because of his race. Eleanor Holmes Norton, U.S. Congresswoman, stated that O.J. Simpson has become the proxy, not because the black man is a criminal, but because the black man is increasingly seen as a criminal by virtue of his sex and color. As a black man defending himself against the criminal justice system, Simpson represented an entire population of people who
who are unfairly treated because of their race. For many minorities, he became a symbol for inequality in the court of law. Racial injustice became a significant argument of the defense after they got a hold of a highly controversial piece of evidence that belonged to an LAPD officer, Mark Furman.
First thing, anything out of a nigger's mouth for the first 5 or 6 sentences is a lie.
Furman was the cop who entered the scene of the crime first, and therefore was very involved in the investigation. Furman became the center of his own scandal when the defense found a tape recording of the officer. In the tape, Furman makes multiple racist remarks and brags about how he has harassed many black gang members to the point where he, quote, had them begging that they never be gang members again.
No blood mark. No problem. Not even any marks. Just body shots. You ever try to find a bruise on a nigger? Too tough, huh?
He explained in the tape his use of profanities and violence against the black men arrested by the LAPD. This brought a lot of attention to Furman, and questions arose as to whether or not he took the blood sample of OJ's that went missing. Due to the fact that he was a big part of evidence collection and recording, the Dream Team argued that Furman could have been the one who planted the droplets of blood at the crime scene to purposefully frame OJ for the murder. Racial issues played a large part in the case in many ways other than the ones that dealt with Mark Furman. On one hand, many groups of minorities had biased opinions about the case, expressing that it had become not so much a determination of OJ's guilt or innocence, but more so a fight against the unfair advantages in a legal system largely administered by whites. On the other hand, the white community questioned whether a jury mainly comprised of minorities would convict a black regardless of the amount of evidence discovered against him. In the end, the racism that was displayed in the Furman tapes was a consequential part of determining the verdict and further discredited the LAPD's actions. Celebrities, whether we like to admit it or not, have a very influential role in our society. This is true even if what they depict of themselves isn't genuine. We constantly hear of celebrities in the media, in the news, on the radio, in advertisements. They are looked up to because of the impact they have not only on the lives of their fans, but on anyone who knows of them. O.J. Simpson was no exception. He was in comedies, commercials, and played as a star athlete. He had a spouse, children, and lived a very affluent lifestyle. He seemed to live with purpose, the quintessential achiever of the American dream, which is something that many admired. The Simpson Scandal revealed a lot about America's attitudes, politics, morals, and values. All of these were and are hugely influenced by celebrities. In times of despair, we need a figurehead to look up to. Whether it was Roosevelt's fireside chats or JFK's report to the American people, we need reassurance. The Simpson Scandal made apparent the fatal flaws within our society and proved how far people will go to cover up the truth.
The O.J. Simpson case was a turning point in the way our judicial system functioned. Riddled with lost evidence, racial discrimination of the police department, and an obviously gilded verdict, millions of people lost faith in our government the day that O.J. Simpson was set free. After the Simpson case was over, DNA evidence began to gain prominence in later cases as important pieces of information to determine the facts of the crime. Information shifted to be less based on word of mouth and more based on cold, hard facts. Police departments and forensics investigators are required to be upfront and careful while dealing with the investigation, and records are intricately kept every step of the way. Now, in every court case, evidence is handled much more carefully. New processes have been developed in order to ensure the credibility in each investigation in attempts to avoid the malpractices and negligence that filled the Simpson case.
After looking closely at the O.J. Simpson case, there's a lot to be said about the torn viewpoints taken by both the media and the public. Overall, the media had a huge impact on what the public was exposed to and consequently what they were able to understand. This trickle-down system of information left room for false depictions of the truth. The response of the public versus the core evidence displayed during the trial, which seemed to prove O.J. guilty, highlights this schism of information that between the media and the people. Despite all of the evidence against him, O.J. ended up a free man. Whether or not the outcome was truly justified remains a secret only that O.J. knows the answer to. This case exemplifies the corrupt measures legal figures will take to disfigure the truth. A government for the people, by the people, is meant to protect, lead, and secure the individuals it stands for. In this case, many people were let down by the country's power of authority in the federal court when they heard that the verdict was not guilty because people believed there was so much evidence proving otherwise. There is even new evidence today that O.J. was in fact culpable for the double homicide that was committed on the night of June 12, 1994. Looking back upon the trial, the prosecution made many senseless errors that gave a guilty man his freedom. Where does this leave the future of our justice system? Can we truly rely on its credibility after seeing such a huge mistake unaccounted for? Has our government done enough to try and correct its mistakes? What do you believe?